Hello, this is Alec Johnson for Twin Cities Photo Now and the Photo Critique. Today's critique takes a look at a large scenic landscape, focusing on the elements of a large scenic landscape, as well as color theory. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's talk about David's image here a little bit. One of the first things I really enjoy is some of the basic components of a big landscape shot. He's basically used rule of thirds here, so he's got roughly a third of the image up here, 2/3 of it down here. And there is a leading line coming from this corner, leading our eye into it, coming off of this tree, pushing us in towards that church. There's even a nice implied leading line coming out of this corner where there's a little bit of open space in the flowers heading us towards the church. And then there's the development of a leading line here. So he's really taking us through some real strong visual elements to land us right here at the church. A couple other things that are really interesting about this image is it's very classically composed in terms of a strong foreground. So we have a foreground here, middle ground area, and then our background. And this is very common, so we can move through these different parts of the element, take a little rest here if we need to visually, get to our background, and then hopefully bring us back to the foreground. A couple of points I'd like to make about this image, and hear me loud and clear, these are not right or wrong, just ways of thinking about it. I'll often talk about border patrol. So the first piece I'd like to focus on in this image is just have everybody think about this corner right here and what's happening, and does that work for the image? I've taken the liberty of cloning in some flowers there. So when I first looked at this image, I actually got stuck and was drawn into that corner very quickly. And so I thought, well, you know, what would happen if I cloned in some flowers? And a couple of things happen. And it's up to you whether you prefer this or not. I'm not saying this is the right thing to do. For me, this enhances the visual pathway, the diagonal line, really leading me into there. So I have this one here, and I have this one here coming out of the corners, which to me helps me move into here. So that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is to say, well, by not cloning images in there, I might have a stronger visual pathway through here. That's your personal preference. Mine would be to actually clone in there. But again, personal preference. So that's one piece I would look at possibly changing if you're open to changing the editorial content of your image. But the main point here is just to really pay attention when we're shooting and ask yourself the question, am I okay with what's happening in that corner versus this corner versus this corner versus this corner? Am I using devices that help move me in and keep me in the image without falling out or getting stuck? So that's the big picture message there. This was shot with a very wide angle lens, and which is a favorite style of mine, so I was immediately drawn to what David did in this image. One of the things I'll do frequently is rescale an image or parts of it to help compensate for the scaling effect of a wide angle lens. And what I mean by that is very wide angle lens tends to over exaggerate size of objects close to the camera and under exaggerate size of objects far away from the camera. So in reality, we wouldn't really see it experienced this way, but that's fine. I mean, it's wide angle lens. But one of the things I'd like to do is maybe make this church a more prominent subject. So I've actually rescaled the top part of the image to illustrate that. So here I've turned on the scaling, and it could go further. So before scaling, after scaling, just to give a little more prominence to that subject, which is obviously a very important one in David's image. Hey, I want to move on now and talk about color theory in this image, because this image really is about color. So I'm going to turn on the color wheel here and talk about how we see landscape images. And Mother Nature very often gives us a great palette of colors. And I'm not just saying bright colors or vibrant colors, but our aesthetic, our human eye, what we like for color and color contrast versus color harmony really affects how we read an image. And this has a lot of things working for it that create movement or depth from a color perspective. What we have here is a variation on the color wheel, a triadic color scheme, and that's the dominant color scheme we actually have in this photo. And you can read about some of the pros and cons of the color scheme in play here. But most importantly, color relationships can create contrast. And so in creating contrast, we give our eye a place to move through the image. Our eye is drawn to points of brightness and highest contrast first. And color can create contrast as well as just tonal contrast in an image. And it's really important to understand that. And we're working with a triadic color scheme here, which I've illustrated in this diagram. Now, what I want to point out is that these black lines are probably closest to, which I'm now painting red, if that's helpful. Our black lines just turn red, which is close to what we're working with here in this color scheme. And I think this image works very well because of that. I want to push it more in this direction. So what I've tried to do with a selective color layer, and I'm going to bring that in to the scene here. I'm going to bring in the selective color layer and show it to you. So just give me a second to try to fit this in here, at least where I can in our video. There we go. Here's a selective color layer that I've added just to help enhance where this image goes color-wise and why. And I'm going to turn that on, and you'll see the effect of the image here. Okay, there it is turned on. Before, after. Okay, now I'm not saying this is the right way to go, but I want to talk about what I've done briefly here. And so I want to look down here in this part of our Photoshop adjustments. And what I've done is move the reds in a direction that actually cools them a little bit. So here, warms them. So here's adding cyan to red. Doesn't help my image, but moving back in this direction really does. So I did that in the reds. In the yellows, I actually moved the yellows of the grasses and the foliage toward green to really actually play better off our color wheel here. So I've taken grasses, which are generally really red as yellow, and I've moved them towards green to work with our color theory. Our oranges and reds are up in this zone, and now I want to work the flowers just a little further out of magenta and towards blue. They're not going to be blue, but let's take a look at those adjustments here where I might actually peel some yellow out of them, out of the magentas. And you can always adjust the relative brightness or darkness of these, but I didn't feel I needed to do that in this image at all. So let me turn that layer on and off again. Before, after. And you can ask yourself, is that the way? Oh, hey, I want to talk about one more thing here. The sky, the blues. And so I definitely made an artistic choice in this image to actually create some harmony. Instead of adding blue as a fourth color in here that really didn't harmonize very well, I decided to warm the sky, to just bring it in balance with some of the other subject matter. So I added some red and yellow to the blues in the sky to help warm them up a little bit and try to create a little bit cleaner transition between these subjects and this subject, which is a sky. So I'll turn that on and off again. Not saying this is the right way to go. It's personal preference in terms of the type of mood you create. But I really just wanted to illustrate how we think about color theory in this particular setting and how we might use it to enhance harmony or contrast and movement in the image. Hey, I want to thank David for submitting a great image, a beautiful image. And I want to also point out one more thing here because I wanted to talk about these little halos around the trees in the church. I can even sense a little bit of a halo. I don't know if when he was all done, he did some HDR work on this image. Kind of those halos kind of make me feel like he did, but somehow they developed in there and I would not want to see those in a larger print for sure. If he did do, and I don't know this, if he did use an HDR routine like Photomatics, I would encourage everyone to consider using the exposure fusion feature in Photomatics versus the HDR feature. I think doing that and then coming into Photoshop to do some additional work can be quite pleasing to the image and work a little bit better than the HDR feature for photorealistic. Again, I want to thank David for a beautiful image and for submitting to the Twin Cities Photo Now Photo Critique. Thank you.